Thank you, Chus, for accepting to come tonight. We were thinking of kicking off by letting me go through or run through a keynote which says and shows a little bit more of the piece that's in the exhibition. But perhaps a brief word on how I came to this piece was through another work that didn't happen, which is often the case, I suppose, and which was going to be a piece about the war in Liberia. And it was based upon an image taken by a French photographer named Noël Kidou, whom not many of you know by name, but you certainly know his photography. And there was a sort of a French school of photographers, which is not really true, but there were some very good French photographers working in Liberia at that time. And Noël Kidou had taken one picture which caught my attention, and I made a mistake of having my assistant asking him for permission instead of calling the man directly. And he, well, his ego was hurt, I suppose, and he taught me a lesson on what do artist philosophers think they do when photographers who risk their life and photograph people about to lose their life or risking their life. What do they have in common? And so started a debate which didn't last long, but which was settled in a few mails, in which I replied more or less, do you think that well, he was actually reproaching me that I didn't take into account the suffering of people. And I said, you have to understand that there's also an afterlife in any photograph, and that the names, the places, and the blood that's flowing become secondary to the picture, which is the hard reality of any picture that's allowed to age. And we kind of stopped there. And I felt maybe I shouldn't go on with that work. It was going to be the birthday of a photograph. I knew exactly when this picture was photographed and where, at what time, because it was part of the description. And that was going to be a once in a year recurrent detail that would synchronize with the original image. That said, there were some problems. There were some moral problems, maybe, although usually I don't care too much about morality. But I mean, it's not a blocking point. But there were some problems of the white guy dealing with post-colonial problems in Africa, which kind of stopped me in my tracks. And so I abandoned that project altogether, and as I always do, I roam in libraries more than in the internet. I don't know why libraries work better for me than the internet. And I came across this picture, which is very close, you could say, to the work that I have reconstructed. And the caption in the picture was quite similar to the title of the work. And I started to question myself on what I thought was fascinating in this picture. And it was an infectious relation between the title, the oil workers of the Shell company, and blah, 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 and then the rain, and the amount of water and humidity present in the image. And I said to myself, well, that's great news. I have a picture in Nigeria which has nothing to do with conflict, guerrilla, opposition, or war, and which has everything to do with stuff that would belong to sort of impressionist study of materials almost. And at the time I had been working on a few pieces in 3D, and I started to think a lot about the surface and textures and the emptiness of figures in 3D. Actually, I started thinking also about the idea of the zombie, which is the person with who became a shell, who no longer has any internals, mental and physical, but who's just a weak shell, and sort of projected that into that image. And then started to study, well, I'm going to run through this quite rapidly. I started to study on different images from the history of photography, but very various sources of what is water and what are oily surfaces, until the point where I could perhaps no longer distinguish myself between the two materials. And my project was that I would try to find a third sort of surface, which is not water, which is not oil, but which is something absolutely artificial, and also behaves that way, but which is some kind of resin or epoxy of some kind of weird material. And then here you can see a very, oh yeah, I always do this, I don't know how to manage my keynote. I wanted to show you an early animation in black and white, but nevertheless, we go on with, this is how then we constructed in the studio a set with 40 DSLR cameras. And I always work in between technologies. I never work in one technology full time. I also don't think technologies are there to serve a purpose. They really have to speak with you, and you have to speak to them in order to get into this weird zone where you understand and don't understand. And so my people in the oil workers are made from photography, but they are then interpreted through a computer as three-dimensional objects. And here you can see the set, and in the next picture you can see actually one of the people on a motorcycle who are sitting on, I think they're sitting on a broom, and more or less imitating. Then comes out this series of images. Oh yeah, he's not sitting on a broom at all, he's sitting on a... And then here you have a first interpretation of a scan. This is a bit more clear, where you can see how a body of a zombie, I call them zombies, but it's rather lovingly, but of course it's explosive terrain, you know, it's very delicate. They're made out of millions of polygons, and then they're being dressed up again with the shell, with the outside. And the moment you get to the shell, this is a procedure which I call pictorial 3D. It's actually a part of photography, and it has nothing to do with the little glasses. It also has nothing to do with gaming. Its purpose is to make an image. This is one of my people without the eyes. It just has black holes. And the materials were also chosen as to have a sort of over-identified quality. Real plastic, real cotton textiles. Of course, the eyes, again, we're on slippery territory here. The eyes which have to be produced purposefully. This is what we call a clay model. And in a way, much of pictorial 3D goes back to, you could say, Renaissance, early Renaissance image making, where you start with the grisaille and then you build up the layers until you end with the colored textures. And that is my... How do I do that? I really don't know that. Actually, that was an animation. And then, consequently, we make the scene and start putting people in. There's a constant back and forward between the document and the artifice. And this actually is a screen grab during the production, and it shows the humidity. It's just an image of humidity. Until I think these are the final images in full resolution. So my sort of hypothesis was, when I started this piece, is that I would use something really, really banal as a phenomenon, which would be motion, elliptical motion through that otherwise immobile scene, which people now, when they look at the piece, kind of identify with movement in the water, but it's actually, the thing is completely frozen. And I just wanted to see what this third material would look like, what this oil, alias water, would become. And that is, in a nutshell, the whole project of the oil workers. It was a rather fast production, in the sense that we spent, with my studio, we spent 4 or 5 months, not more, working on it, which is very little. I tend to work between 5 years, 2 years and 5 years in one piece.
Yeah, it was fast.
That was fast. So that is, if you like, an introduction into how the work came into being. And there's always this sticky back and forth between conceptual thinking and very simple. Sometimes sometimes criticized for working with very simple phenomena. But maybe I can kick off like that. Maybe the reason why simple phenomena like gloss or water or air or clouds or shadows or wind can be important is because a few days ago we were talking with Chus over Skype on how in a increasingly virtual environment, and up until now we can always say that the virtual environment is an outside environment, but I'm actually thinking that at one point this environment will turn inwards, and that in a virtual environment we are very much dependent on memory, and sensorial inputs are obviously essential for memory. That is memory, and this is basically the reasons why in many of my works I've tried to go back to these phenomena.
I've been, lately, I think you describe it as simple, and I think it's very humble of you to do so. But for many of us, probably the question would be, why to go all that way to take a picture, so to say, why do you need to render every single element and so on? And then, of course, there is reasons, and I think this work for me represents like some sort of summarization of many things that has not been written, but they are key to understand the turn that we are currently going, which is very, very difficult to put in words probably. And if yes, it has been put in words by some philosophers, but actually artists has been kind of rediscovering ways of facing this new reality. So lately I've been thinking how for many years it was very difficult to address abstraction. Yeah. And the way that we have been addressing abstraction is very classical, and we have been just counterposing abstraction to representation. But this is also very simple, and there is abstraction without representation or a relationship with representation. And there is also an abstraction that bears a legitimation and looks like abstraction, but is not abstract at all. And for example, I think that this movement that is called post-digital art, and regardless of what you may think about it, It's interesting for the reason of actually paying attention to a layer that is in between representation, depiction, and something else that is called rendering, and that represents a way of giving reality in a way that's abstract. So in other words, it's exactly what you are saying. So you would have a third, a three-dimensional image. It looks like abstract to you because you don't exactly know what you are looking at. You may think you are looking at an abstract image, but you also know that because of the process and probably the intention of the artist, it bears a legitimation that is kind of linked with a process that has to do with science, or it has to do with depiction, or even with representation, which is a completely different thing, but it comes from the world, with a world which is not based on the system of abstraction. So when I saw this piece, I thought this is immense, because on the one hand, you are being very abstract, so you depart from a really, you are decomposing the image in abstract terms, and then you are recomposing the image again in a way that the other day we were talking about Flusser, and many artists are now referring to Flusser. I think I have friends that many artists refer to him because...
The Czech thinker, Willem
Yeah,
Flusser.
Willem Flusser was a Czech philosopher that grew up actually in Brazil for reasons that I never quite understood, and emigrated to France and always addressed the audience in German. So it's really like himself was his own description of the synthetic reality. So Flusser once gave an interview that I think was quite amazing. He visited Osnabrück for an art festival, an electronic art festival. And then he was interviewed about what he thought that these artists dealing with technology were facing. And then he gave a really beautiful explanation. He said that, well, we are facing a revolution. And this revolution has to do with the fact that, of course, we know with the discovery of the alphabet, we have been codifying the reality in a way that made us trust for 3,500 years a verbal code or a verbal coding. So images were mythical before the alphabet, and with the alphabet, language and image started to have a very complex relationship, but this complex relationship is based on description. But it's a very particular description because the alphabet is a linear system. It goes from A to Z. So this linear system articulates an imagination of a continuity, but also a timeline. In other words, he says, with the invention of the alphabet, which is an invention which is a informatical invention. It has to do with information. So with the invention of the alphabet, the historical time started, because you could actually describe, but you could describe in befores and afters. So he says, but of course we came to a limit with the new technology. So historical time has been reversed in many ways by the ways that things coexist. And then he says, we need to invent new ways of producing codes. And then he gave that very simple explanation. He says, the new code is going to be based on synthetic materials that by no means belong together, but actually we need to put together. And we need to put together in order to produce knowledge, a knowledge that cannot rely on both historical time on the one hand and language on the other. So this that may seem very abstract and complex, for me, kind of describes totally this exercise of something which is impressively familiar and relies on the idea of depicting people in a particular historical time, and an historical time that is also related to a certain hermeneutics of how this time relates to our time. So if you, for example, for many people, when they see or when we see people of another race, we produce an anachronic reading. We don't think that people of dissimilar races are in the similar time. So there is an effect of anachronism that has been many times studied by people that deal with the question of race. And then, of course, the question of Africa, that is named underdeveloped, so they are not in the same time as we are. They are, but they are not. So, this synthetic nature is already in us, but then you actually create an Africa that is not existing, meaning that is depicting the idea of a documentary and Yeah, that much to simplicity. Can you tell us something about how simple you are?
Well, it's actually when going back to Flusser, I hope we're not going to speak the entire evening about him, but he's somehow important in the sense that at least he made me understand that sequential thinking, historical thinking, and linear writing have long been surpassed by visual language. And he said as one thing in visual language, it has just one common denominator, is that it just goes faster and faster and faster. And that made me think of, actually it made me think back of photography. We're at the point where most of us start to understand the fabrication that photography has always been. But let's face it, during modernity, photography has been essential. And Flusser says at one point, without photography, modernity would long have, the planet wouldn't exist. We would have killed off one another. It's this kind of mechanism to produce material that was magic, and that had a code, but that was hiding the code. And I realized that somehow this period of magic is over. And for instance, I've been working with what I call preconceived photography for a number of years, in which was basically, the opposite of a person with a camera stumbling upon an event and taking a picture. It's thinking long and having inspirations of certain events, not events, but scenes, which have an immediate synthetic quality, fabulous quality, but which you need to produce, which do not exist and which could not exist, but which you need to produce. And I go through a number of completely abstract, and this is what I said a moment ago, this synthetic way of working and this 3D pictorial reconstructions they make me realize that the whole wonderful magic of accidents and contingency, it also applies to the moving image, of course, that this period is over, and that we are on a train towards a sort of pure ideology of an image, where at the end...
Define ideology. Define ideology.
The final ideology?
No, define it. Like, what do you understand?
Well, actually, I realized that this is this is what I'm saying is a completely non-researched thesis. But the end of the station is madness. The end of the station is a complete internalization of images. When we sit together and we see an audience, but I'm seeing something completely different than you do. And we would define it today as madness, but actually, if I were Google in the future, my biggest success as a company would be to define many of the desires of what I would be seeing when I would be looking at you, and then, and there is a relation with preconceived image making there. We're moving, and so this is something that I'm saying is kind of sounds negative, but I'm not so sure about it. I just have an intuition that when this picture that I have been externalizing, when there's no longer a need to produce it, when there's this inner madness that actually projects this picture through your eyes, so to speak, I'm not going to say it phenomenologically, through your eyes to the world, and you're certain you're observing it, that at that moment this, you are a blank sheet, and you are ready to be written upon. And sometimes I have the feeling that I'm already seeing this happening when I see people looking at images. The importance that is given to text prior to looking, and I would sort of illustrate this, but this is brutal from my part, but I would illustrate it with Taryn Simon. Have you ever been in an exhibition of Taryn Simon? Maybe, so she's this well-known American photographer. The pattern of the visitor goes, so if you have a square room, the pattern of the visitor goes like that. End of the wall. End of the wall. And so the first activity is reading. And then comes a glance upon it. And there is this sort of, so you can see I'm not an intellectual, no, with the way I am trying to explain my stuff. But you can see that there is a increasing importance of information in perception.
But I think that, meaning I only see good news in all what you are explaining. But of course the bad news is that we are at such an early stage of that. I think it's undeniable, I think, that we are kind of entering into a moment where we are actually starting to be osmotic with the machine. So if modernity has been defining a separation and was so keen on differences of all kinds, and it was also so clear that difference could be made in between the man and the machine, I think the man with the camera in the hands is the man with a camera in the hands controlling the camera. The camera is not controlling you. It's Flusser who's saying that you are actually working for the device and all that, but still modernity has been teaching us differences, and because it's kind of Hegelian. I think we are into these parameters of distance, because if there is no distance, there is no judgment, and you need judgment, because if there is no judgment, there is no ways of knowing what is good and what's bad. So we are entering effectively, I think, in an era that is much more metabolic, that is much more osmotic, that you are actually being penetrated by these substances. And one of the substances that is going to penetrate us is definitely the image substance, that we are not going to make anymore, but we are going to be made by, or we are going to be part of this kind of process, which is super complex. So I would agree with you. Then to call it ideology is like to call it machine, because it's probably like you should be calling it more stomachal,
I always have a conspiracy
headachy
theory.
Yeah, no, that's very good. But what I mean is, the Taryn Simon example is a very good one, but actually we should think that she is a kind of, like, we are not ruled by information, but let's put it all the way around. One could say that she is very old-fashioned, still relying on very traditional ideas of information relating to an image as being two different things and not being substance of the same, still producing a mockery of the magic of the eye reading. You know, how many of my teachers would say the wall is falling down because people are not reading anymore, and Taryn Simon is actually going to the school book back and to a genre that we know, where you have an image and you have a little bit of a text, and then you have experience both of matching. So you are producing matches in between what you understand with your reading and what you see with your eyes. So he's kind of synchronizing your body, no? Like she could be magic in that way.
Yeah, you become also a curator in a way, when you put the text and the image together. I mean, anyway, there's this conflux of no, maybe I should. I was going to go back to the same, but I was going to elaborate still on that by giving the example of the photograph of the landscape made with an iPad, of which I had this discussion with a friend of mine, and I tried to explain where this thing with this internalized images and madness is going. And I said we're at the crossroads of where we still have the religion of photography, where we still have this sense of mutual authentication between the lens and the subject in whatever we see. And this is of course what I'm in a way perverting by synthetically constructing this image, which looks obviously non-spectacular, but is done with technology that belongs to spectacular maybe. And she said, well, look at this picture I've taken this morning, is wonderful sunrise from my bedroom. And she showed me this landscape. And in an attempt to illustrate the changes in photography, or a few changes, but this is really for dummies, I said, how much of this image did you make? And I said, the cloud, in order not to say Google, the cloud knows where you are, it knows what time of the day it is, it knows the landscape you're looking at. The cloud actually has a completely generic version of the image that you think you have pushed a button and you have made. And so it's just a simple example of blurring of someone else's information with your information.
But I think that I think it's very positive. So, because I want to think positively about it. Like, imagine, it would be probably the dream of Velázquez, no? Like, he was obsessing with the idea that it was the landscape as given by the Academy of that time in Spain was too complex. So he wanted to simplify it, a la Google, a la iPad. So for him, for example, the horizon was a burden. Like, he was always having these fights with Pedro Pacheco, his teacher, where actually the Spanish horizon should be low, because the plateau where Madrid is located is quite high, and then the horizon should be depicted as low, to give the idea that there is first a lot of heaven and blue upon the horizon, and then second, the empire. I think you need to leave space for ideals and not depict the humans there so down. And then Velázquez was like super pissed off by that, and was all the time actually upping the, simplifying so that he could depict less elements to the absolute brutality of what today we call redundancy. So it's true, we are getting super redundant. Not like we have these artist friends or whatever, all of us go into Google and then pick up a single picture like your wedding. So you upload your wedding picture and it looks like whatever wedding, or your baby smiling, every baby smiling in Google Images. Birthday, the same. Wedding anniversaries, the same. Meetings of reunions of classes, the same. So sameness is really something that helps us exactly what you are defining, to learn how to deal with the control over the definition at the end of the genre. Or how would you think about
it's interesting, this, the example of the Velázquez, of course, to leave enough space for the grand ideas.
Yeah.
But that, in any case, is, I mean, the West, the history of the image in the West is a very volatile conversation between the political world, the word, historical thinking, linear thinking, and the image, which is always in a.
How do you see the future?
I think
because you do images.
Well, many have been saying pure image, and in German you say the Vorstellung. Yeah, I'm again here with Flusse, but the Vorstellung, where you have something in front of it, and that at the end, what some cultures really fear is that you have nothing but that, is that you have nothing but the Vorstellung, and that what is behind it has become secondary to the image. Oh, we are long there. We all know that. But he says it's actually the speed and the importance with which negotiations and commerce and life, social life happens on that level is increasing all the time. So I am not sure, but in image making, what strikes me is how fast somehow the aesthetics of modern thinking are over, and the discipline are over, and how baroque a time we live in a way.
But you were right in saying that it's going to be a war, quote unquote, meaning in between those that may define. But I think that therefore artists are becoming more important for that specific reason. I think you call it ideology, but of course I think we are facing the danger of corporations, like, you know, like in a science fiction movie, all the images are not anyhow produced by devices, or we don't watch them anymore. They are like in the panopticon of our brain, like in a big brain full of Google images kind of thing, kind of server, the mega server. And then those that are able to define what we feel towards an image, how we interpret that image, and then we are in the hands of those. That's probably becoming true. But it's also becoming true that artists are understanding these mechanisms probably better than 100 years before.
It's strange. We live in a time of, I would say, realism in one way, and on the other hand, we also live in a time of the supremacy of the Vorstellung. These somehow ingredients that in my sort of thinking provoke a nuclear war. You know, when you put them together, they're like nuclear fusion. They are two contradictory items.
But perhaps you could, like you were mentioning to me, you are doing an animation, and I think it's a good example. Like, perhaps you can talk about it?
Do you refer to the, which animation do you refer to?
The one that you are working on?
Like the program or the Jungle Book?
The Jungle Book.
Well, this is early, but I'm doing something which is completely illegal. I have stolen a Disney film, and I realized I'm not the first artist to do so, obviously. But as you all know, Jungle Book of 1967 is one of the greatest animations of all time. And I can show you some stuff, but it's very chaotic. I'm redoing it, and so I don't do, actually I'm a very impatient guy, but I don't do things halfway if I can avoid it, and I'm redoing the entire animation. And then you have to realize that Disney was the most expensive production when it was released, but I'm doing a lazy version of it, and where there is no longer any, how do you get that? Okay, where there's no longer any anthropomorphic qualities in the animals. So you all still remember who's Bagheera and Baloo and blah blah blah. I know this is far away from what we've just been talking about.
Yeah, not gonna gossip.
And it's actually, this is going to live a black market life. Shit, I'm saying this for a camera.
That's okay.
And this is going to be something that will not very often be shown publicly. But what I'm doing is I'm making a film, an animation film, with classically trained animators. We're working already since 1.5 years. And we're actually leaving all the scenes intact and all the animals as they were. So the snake is there, the bear is there, the apes, the vultures. The only ones who are not there are the human beings, except for the girl at the end of the film. She comes back every hour at the hour. She comes back and she sings her song, and then she's off again. And for the rest, we are copying. No, we're actually not copying it. We're making everything anew. But we're trying to. This is a hard one because I'm trying to introduce boredom into the job of animators. And animators' work is to create life. And I'm telling them to take the life out and to make the animals a hybrid between an animation which looks 100% Disney, so children will not be able to distinguish, but they will slowly be disappointed because they will keep on projecting stuff in it which doesn't come back. And the piece is all about memory. It's all about things which you see in your brain, but which you don't see on the surface.
Is boredom defined by the movement, or is defined by the lack of action, or the fact that it's
the
animal
lack of
world?
action? And it's a hybrid. It's like a hybrid car. It's a hybrid between recordings in the zoo. So they or maybe I can go through my keynote a little bit. It's a hybrid between recordings in the zoo, documentaries, also stolen, and
that's great information.
And then these are some of my sketches. This is some study material. I spent an entire summer in every possible zoo I could find in the near area, and then try to compare the animal behavior of the zoo. The zoo is ideal because animals are really bored, and with what I had, and it's the complete opposite of course. So here again, I'm trying to look for a structural problem in animation and in life giving, and I'm trying to make these two conflict. We have Baloo with some of my study material of a bear. At one point, Baloo actually makes this swimming scene in the lake, and he's sort of floating like a balloon, and I'm giving him a 200 kilos heavy body. This is the difference. And he's stepping through the water rather carefully. So it's all redone, except the backgrounds. The backgrounds are often collaged together and then taken. And here you can see a foot of one of the elephants laid over footage that I made in the Berlin Zoo of a real elephant. And then we trace these back, and then the animators make that. This is suicidal work. And I regretted ever having started it. But meanwhile, I've spent so much of my budget halfway, I have to continue. So it's kind of a burden.
Why did you choose that particular movie? Why every Belgian artist
it chose me.
Chosen, you know.
It chose me. I spent a long time. Actually, I wanted to make a different piece where a wolf and a deer were going to sit together, observing somebody in his tent who wouldn't dare to come out. And this, you can imagine that I considered this more work than doing the animation. And I then started to go to the zoo, and somehow I must have watched this animation, and all of a sudden the idea was there, and I could no longer ignore it. And my credo is usually rather simple. When I'm bored, I take the next best idea.
But is the story the same? The plot of the movie?
Well, it follows the same pattern. It follows the same scenes.
So we will recognize,
yes,
like as if it's a ballet with almost the same.
Yes,
it has the memory behind, but
it
then
has
it goes
the memory.
somewhere else.
It just has the space, the memory, and something left over of the animals. But I think kids will be crying, and my ideal will be they'll be going to the screen and they'll be hitting the screen, and they'll be shouting at Baloo, and come on, do something, and he'll have this physical window between yourself and the thing and the screen.
It's an immense...
It's the essence of pornography.
No, it's an immense Vorstellung. But why? Perhaps the reaction is different. Perhaps they would just think that you are returning the movie to the animals.
Yes, that was my... I had to go through many imaginary court hearings.
Do we get frustrated by watching animals? We don't. Meaning
No.
it's just animals.
No, they're absolutely...
So they are a little bit more perverse.
But it's I think it's our own boredom that we're seeing. And in these imaginary courtroom explanations where I justify, I say, I'm bringing back, I'm trying to do justice to the animals while you've actually perverted them. And I have two lawyers who have been advising, and they said, no, don't do it. And they said, make it an homage. Don't make it a parody, make it an homage.
But if you don't Haraway the movie, then it's kind, you know, it may be better in the sense that you are just taking the imagination of the anthropocentric world to the animal-centric universe. Then it's also working, perhaps, with the lawyers of Disney.
I hope so. Something might have, but perhaps also not. Maybe I would hope they really don't care.
No, they do. Come on. They are gonna bother you.
That's
but
great.
This is also adding.
I will have worked for 3 years and I won't be able to make the work surface.
It may happen, but I don't think so. They are probably allowing you to show the movie, but it's. But they probably would notice that.
But I will. There's one moral principle. I'm not earning money.
Oh yeah. That's
with
key.
it.
That's really important. But if I would be a very, very perverse art critic and a modern one, imagine that I am actually a male and I am a modern art critic and not coming from Spain. I come from a more sexy place if I could choose. And then I would say like that you are actually a very perverse artist as well, because you are like dealing with all this relationship and tensional relationship, not only in between the future and the past of the image, the relationship in between the image and photography, the image and the cinema. You are actually doing something that nobody wants to be reminded of, because it's not true, but we love to think that cinema is coming from painting, and then you are just sending us back to the idea that cinema may come from science, and it's probably more true. And the Russians were reminding us all the time, but you are doing it again. And then, apart from that, which is already kind of dirty in itself, you are doing something which is playing with cultural stereotypes or ideas of how we construct the idea of reception, not only of the image, but in cultural terms. And both, I think, with the Kipling Book of the Jungle animated by Disney, that is not necessarily the most multiracial company that has been seeing the Earth, and with the idea of replicating African people in your studio with 3D, and then just, remaking poverty, so to say, you are really polemic. And being Belgium, I think one should not forget that, because I'm a modern critic, so I would just blame it on the Congo thing.
There's certain territories where, as a Belgian, we are
Exactly.
easily allowed, but also somewhere we absolutely should not,
But it is actually really polemic.
Well, it is a problem.
I didn't say problem, I said polemic. But
no,
are these issues of any, are they playing in your mind, this idea of this, because the texture of both the oil workers and the Book of the Jungle are not that separated?
It's interesting what you say. They are what I'm always hoping for, but I'm not sure, is that there will be sort of language shortcut in sort of
Soon.
traditional. No, just in when you try to verbally analyze, let's say. When you try to make oil workers a polemic, for example, if we would try to put it on the surgeon's table, and there's these escape routes in the work, which I call escape routes. I'm not sure if they are, but which are surface events, which actually do not depict. Well, other than the title, they do not depict any clear historical events, but they show rather light and reflection and skin and plastic and engines and metal. And I'm always interested in this escape route. I call it an escape route, but it's in fact, it's just a way of trying to regenerate energy in looking at a picture, and not letting it come to a conclusion. Avoiding conclusiveness is oh so essential.
I think it's very interesting what you are saying, because polemically, one could say that in order to avoid the politics of depicting those that are in conditions that are different from us, I think from animals, but also those animals were there for other reasons. And the animal wall in the Kipling, I think Kipling was all about Asia, but of course the old workers are all about Africa. In order to avoid that, then you can construct a scenario that would allow you to observe it, because the fascination we have and we feel, we cannot escape it, and we retain a certain right, which which images have in common with, and that's very polemic, with both watching the conditions of others, the life conditions of others, pornography, and art. So the three realms have a lot in common.
But that's what images always do. They allow us to sit back and observe, or they allow us to take distance. They are actually a power mechanism. Now, I don't know is it an idea that I quickly still say, or is it too late that I would say something about this other project?
Yes, say something. I think they would take the time for us.
There's one thing which we're in the middle, so there's actually two pieces I'm working on. One is this animation, which is never ending, and the other is this, which is literally never ending if everything goes well. It's a computer program, and it's a circulation around this place, which is the Berlin Olympic Stadium, which is a sort of, for me, this is the first visualization of techno music, because it's so repetitive and so identical that you are overwhelmed when you are in these arcades. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to run a virtual camera through these arcades. It has a sort of classicistic quality about it, because you just see arcades and the landscape behind it. And it's going to be piece in real time. So it will run day and night, and it will run in sync with calendar time and with the weather and with weather influences. And it's a collaboration between myself and, well, basically myself. But in between, I'm trying to get information from a material expert.
But we can watch it where? Online?
It will be, I think at one point it will come online. But it will have a birth date, and which will be next year, and from then on it will hypothetically continue a millennium. But my studio will write a program for 50 years, sort of guaranteed 50 years, and it will essentially be a book with all the material about the work, and in 50 years, if somebody wishes, they can pick it up and they can continue the project. But I, of course, know that nobody will be interested in picking up the project. But the idea is that the Olympic Stadium...
But it is a camera.
It is not actually a camera, it's a virtual camera. And
what is a virtual camera?
It's something that looks like a camera, but that's just...
but it acts like a camera?
It acts like a camera.
So it could be a camera?
It could be a camera.
Okay.
And
So it makes pictures, as if it
shows
was a camera.
pictures, yeah.
And it is located in a real place.
It is located right there, so it makes circles around it every hour.
And the filmmaker of that camera is a program.
It's a computer program which gets data together. And the reason why I'm working with a few scientists, like material experts and a biologist, and somebody who knows a lot about ruins, is because I want to let the building decay in real time. And my main helpers are going to be weed, little flowers, basically the way Chernobyl looks now after 25 years. And ultimately in 50 years there will be trees. But of course it's an ironical vengeance on, as you could guess, on the Third Reich, on letting things turn into ruin. My ultimate aim is to, when you look at it, to make you feel, in the best case, how short your own biological time is and how large ideological time is. It's the...
But so that I understand it, the camera is cumulating the information.
Yes, it's the camera is actually putting information together in real time in Berlin.
Yeah.
When it snows, and when it snows for a week, this has an effect on the vegetation. These are again some sketches and some study material.
And you said that it's going to be a book produced?
There will be a book which
after
will...
the millennium? So not by you?
No, the book will be, should be within 5 years.
So already you are going to kind of step it.
Yeah,
in ways that...
I'm going to say you do it like that or...
And you are adding another chapter to the criticism of some of boredom in contemporary art, like by doing an exhibition in real time of 5 years of recording.
These are some of the sculptures. This is interesting with this, if you think that the architects were idiots, they're not. This sculpture is, in summertime, catches the last rays of sun. This sculpture. But this is already a scan, so I'm actually scanning the building. I'm not reconstructing it. And this is one of our recent results. I know this looks bad, but it's not going to be that bad, I hope. And
so again, there is a layer of reality and a layer of constructed reality, and then a layer of documenting both.
It's a completely synthetic, actually.
So there is no. So when you are talking about 1 week of snow, is synthetic snow?
Completely, yeah.
So you are simulating.
Yes, I'm simulating.
You are simulating a complete environment of reality.
Yes.
In documenting, quote unquote, an invention of historical documentation of 4,000 years.
Yes.
So the program is the one determining the environment.
Yes, the program is doing the circulations, is getting the weather feeds, is getting the position of the sun. And I'm doing every stone exactly where it should be. And this is also actually relates to techno music. It's very interesting to see the power of repetition in that building. It's really like, it's constructed like an army. It's this beautification of everybody as a soldier, identical, working as a small particle and creating the greater thing. And I'm going to let disintegrate this building stone by stone, starting with the weeds, starting with the very small one. These are already synthetic images.
So it's a major rendering of the
yes.
of both, of a building, of time, and of an environment
yes.
in time.
Yeah.
So you are rendering three realities, so to say.
Yes, and the only building, this is also already synthetic, the only building that I leave decaying inside is the Unité d'Habitation by Le Corbusier. That will go fast. That will be I don't know. Actually, I haven't studied that. This we know more or less.
So you mean that you are going to initiate a series? So you are going to do this, and then the Le Corbusier.
Well, Le Corbusier will be on the background. You can see it through the columns. Because it stands really just at 150 meters away from the building, and everybody recognizes it with all the colors and everything, and so.
And why did you make that kind of Franco-German axis? Meaning, for what reason? I mean.
Oh, it chose me. I didn't choose it. I just went often to that place because there was something. Well, either friends came to Berlin and I wanted to show them something, or and one day the whole work was there. Basically, you know what I think is a pity is that is there something like a recording or a science or a transcription of how ideas come to because some artists have an idea in a very sort of synthese. They have it immediately and it's all together, and all they do is be the archaeologist of that idea and dig it out.
That's a good thinking.
And there's these different ways, and it's strange, but I'm never come to the point. I have a few artists with whom I communicate on these things, and we never get to the point where we really talk about that, because the reality is that it's very, very banal. No?
But it should be banal.
The way ideas come.
It should be banal for epistemological reasons, because only banality carries the potential of being cognitive at the end, because it would be a result already in your mind. There is absolutely no motivation for you to move.
It's absolutely essential. And it's like also when you think of you're on the hunt for something and you're never going to shoot it down. Sorry, I'm speaking this macho rhetoric by always using the gun, but you're never going to.
You can use a supermarket example. That would be also good.
You're never actually going to shoot it down unless you don't hunt, unless you don't look for it. But this is also an added layer of complex. Is that the older you get, the more you're aware that you shouldn't be hunting, and.
But what is also interesting in the piece is something that very few people are really reflecting upon, which is the fact that images were produced by humans to be consumed by humans, and that's why I kind of criticize you, quote unquote, when you use ideology, the ideology word, because it's true. I think one part of this osmotic process that you were describing at the beginning has to do with being assimilated by images instead of assimilating them. And on the other hand, also that in this process we are coexisting not only with the animals, but we are coexisting with the machines. Mm-hmm. And this coexistence implies something that in cultural critical terms, as we inherited from critical philosophy and modernity, for example, mm-hmm. they are negative. So the fact that we would produce that rendering of this reality, but probably the only ones that can truly perceive and consume these are machines as well. And we experience it every day. Like you go into a surveillance camera, you see a surveillance camera, and you know that it's not a human watching or going through the footage. It's another computer. So there is a machine reporting to another machine that is kind of analyzing. And this is not only disrupting the idea of interpreting an image, but also the time as you are doing it. I think for us humans make almost no sense the 1,000 years of time that you are giving us to wait for the result, but for a computer, for an archive, for civilization.
There's also a certain attraction, isn't it, to the innocence of the machine or the computer or any technological device, because you were speaking about this the polarization of human being and the machine, and man is attracted to the machine precisely because of this promise of innocence, of not having done anything wrong, mm-hmm. isn't it?
Yep.
and which explains all these fictions about the machine that actually appropriates human conscience.
Yeah, in that sense, it goes back with ideas of objectivity, but they are so transformed that you are kind of completely inventing them, because this is an objective document about a building and time, but then it's not objective at all because it's just constructed. So I think that in that sense, the innocence of the rendering is even more complex, or is going back to that dream that perhaps we could find a neutral zone that is not possessed by capital or by, I don't know, the madness of the creative process, which for many are also as scary as capital. I tell you.
Oh no, yeah, you're right. They're part of the same process almost.
So we need to leave it here, but
Thank you, Chus.
no, thank to you. It was great. I think it was a great opportunity, I hope, for all of us to listen to the way that you are approaching and thinking about your work. So it has been kind of really, really productive, I hope, for all of you too. And I thank also the audience for bearing with us. And thank you so much for this
Thank you.
evening.